Welcome everyone to the Great Lakes Permaculture Design Collaborative.
We are a trio of permaculturists.
Rhonda Baird from Bloomington, Indiana.
William Faith from Chicago, Illinois.
Milton Dixon from Ann Arbor, Michigan.
We're teaming up to create a hands-on learning experience
that can catapult you into a regenerative practice of your own.
glpdc.info.
We'll send you to the host of our next Permaculture Design Certificate course.
So here we are today talking about soil, and I am here with Milton Dixon.
Hello.
And William Faith.
Hello.
And we are going to start by orienting ourselves with the permaculture flower and talking about how it relates to soil. So soil relates with how we do land and nature stewardship primarily, but also land tenure questions come up and community governance, because soil is something that we can think of as a commons that we've inherited and that we bequeath to the next generations. So it fits into there. Finances and economics in terms of soil health may determine a lot of our economic basis. Health and spiritual well-being. Healthy soil means healthy people. Education and culture. Soils have traditionally been valued, but and have become less well appreciated, I would say, in our modern culture. So we have some reculturation to do. Tools and technology certainly affect soil and how we build and use soil in our work.
Soil is the best investment we can make.
Absolutely.
I like to think of soil as technology.
A biological technology.
That's right, biological technology.
All right, so what are we aiming for? It's one of those things where you know it when you see it, and you know it's not healthy when you see poor soils, but sometimes we're not used to thinking about what is a good soil. So good soil has a number of components that we're looking at when we encounter it. One is that it has really good structure to it. It's really crumbly, kind of fluffy. It'll have good amount of organic matter in all different states. So there'll be things that are breaking down that you recognize and things that are in different states of decomposition. And it'll have a dark color to it. The darker the soil tends to be the more organic matter. It holds moisture but also drains well. It'll have a balance of minerals and key nutrients. And it'll have something called humic content, where there's kind of a stickiness to it, where it crumbles, but it still also can hold together pretty well. With organic matter, which is going to be one of our secrets to building good soil, we know that typically the soils in most of the continent hold between 1% and 3% organic matter, and we're going to aim to get up to something like 19% organic matter, which we can do with our soil building methods.
I was thinking air as a part of soil. You're kind of hinting at that through the ability to drain and through the structure, but soil needs to breathe as much as we do. And the plant's roots need to breathe in that same way.
I would also add that we're always looking for biology in the soil. That's what differentiates soil from dirt, really, is biology, life. So we're always looking for life in the soil, critters doing their business.
Mm-hmm. Good soil, you know it because it appeals to all of your senses. It'll smell good, have the earthiness smell to it. It'll have different tastes. Like, you wouldn't be afraid to taste a good soil because it's, that it's healthy, and they'll each taste different in that feel. So it'll appeal.
And actually, the sense of touch in your mouth is really great for telling the sand, silt, and clay composition of the soil. It's a good way to physically interact with it.
Even just the tactile sensation of it in your hand, it feels nice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So where does soil come from? Well, these next 3 slides kind of build up for us a picture. Soil builds up initially in sort of a mechanical way. So if you think about, a volcano or a very cold place, rocky place, we can think about parent rock which in the graphic on the left you see we think of as bedrock. That's the parent material for any soil. And then it gets broken up through freeze and thaw and other mechanical processes into smaller and smaller grades. So that's your C and your B horizons. They're breaking up into finer amounts. It's the A, and actually on top of that there's what's called the O horizon. So the A horizon has the smallest particles, the O has the organic matter in it. That first few inches, usually 6 to 8 inches, is where you find most of the life in the soil. And it includes roots and insects and all the things in the soil life. And it takes hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and thousands of years for that to build up over normal natural processes. Humans can speed up the process through our soil building techniques. So it's always a good idea when we're working with soil to understand what is the base stone, that bedrock that the soil has, because that'll tell you something about what kind of chemicals or nutrients will be available in the soil, and also the depth of the soil. And then the global soil regions, it's helpful to understand there are lots of categories here, and they break down in even finer categories, but that they have different qualities. So knowing something about your locale and the kinds of soil that you should find will help you know if there's an anomaly, or how to work with that specific soil.
Soils are very much dependent on what happened before. So, glaciers coming through, whatever kind of volcanic rock or sedimentary events happened in the past, whether there was a lake where you are or rivers, stream beds, those are all going to affect the composition of the soil. And even this global soil regions map, there are not big square regions. It's all very intricate patterns based on what happened previously. Mm-hmm. And you can have those patterns all the way down as a fractal, all the way down into your yard, your whatever quarter acre lot. You could have quite a bit of variation within that space.
Mm-hmm. Here, what I'd like to point out with soil chemistry is, besides the mechanical action happening, there are also these biochemical reactions happening in the soil. So the nitrogen cycle that you see illustrated here is an example of an important biochemical cycle that's happening. There are also phosphorus cycles and carbon cycles and other things that are happening in the soil all the time. And the main point I'd like to make is that soil chemistry is complex, but when you leave the soil intact and you allow it to do what it's supposed to do, when you mimic nature by building soil up on the top and you don't disturb the soil more than you need to, you are keeping all the cycles intact and in place and building up the capacity of the soil to regulate its own health.
In this particular nitrogen cycle, I think it's interesting to note how many of these different points in this diagram involve life. And I think it's that way with most of the other cycles, that you're going to encourage life in general to engage in the processes that they always have. We don't need to chemically or otherwise intervene in these processes because they already exist. We just need to encourage what's already there.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think we're necessarily aware, without having knowledge of what's really going on beneath our feet, we don't really understand how much we disturb that process through tillage or digging. We're not even aware of what happens below that soil without this knowledge.
Mm-hmm. Although, if you want to do further research, look at aerobic and anaerobic bacteria and cation exchange. Okay, soil food web. So this all points to the fact that we have this mechanical, physical particles forming for the basis of the dirt that becomes soil. We have these chemical processes that are enhanced by life. And what is the life going on in the soil? It's the soil food web, which we see an illustration of in this slide. Basically, there's an entire ecosystem happening underneath the surface of the soil or interacting with the surface of the soil. Plants, of course, are generating, they're the battery for the whole thing, in that they generate energy and calories from the sun's energy and the gases and materials available in the soil and turn that into basic energy and organic matter, which nematodes and fungi and bacteria and these microscopic soil organisms are interacting with in millions per teaspoon, perhaps. And then that is interacted with by these, larger and larger arthropods, protozoa, nematodes, and then we get up into things that we're more familiar and comfortable with, perhaps in terms of birds and animals, moles being particular favorite of some people or frustration to some people. Snakes and lizards and reptiles and toads, they're all interacting with this soil food web, and then the rest of the ecosystem is surrounding it. So the more interactions we can have, the more edge, the more nutrient cycling we can encourage in our systems, the healthier the system is overall. Again, what we're after is facilitating life happening in the soil.
Extending that diversity as much as possible, letting the system naturally become more and more complex.
If that's what we're after, there are things we have to recognize are going on all around us and address. So I mentioned earlier that organic matter in the soil should be somewhere around 19 to 20%, and most soils are 1 to 3% organic matter if you test them. And that's in large part because they're starving for more life. There's not enough going on in the soil food web. And part of that is because we export material and nutrients, or we mow or dig or till. We have other threats that we have to think of as well. Sheet erosion and erosion. So on this picture on the left is of a farm where I did some design work, and you can see the person on the opposite side of this big ditch. There's about an 80-foot height difference between the top of the hill and the bottom of the hill where cattle are run on pasture. And this erosion problem between myself and the other person was deep enough. It was about 6 feet deep at the deepest point, and it was dangerous because cattle were actually breaking legs in it. And their erosion solving methods weren't sufficient to deal with the issue. So that was one of our prime issues in repairing and doing design work, was to repair that erosion gully. So erosion's a big issue. Lack of carbon in the soil, what are called dead soils, or soils without life in them. And that might be an area where there's thought of as a desert soil, although desert soils tend to have a lot of life. But our current industrial agricultural soils are so devoid of life that they actually have to pump bacteria and other things that will break down organic matter onto the crop residue, the roots and pieces of leftover corn stalks, in order to have it broken down. So devoid of life, that's an issue. And then polluted soil. So whether that's remediating with mushrooms or plants, we have a responsibility to care for the soils that we have around us.
I would say our responsibility extends beyond that to regenerative design when it comes to soil. It's one thing to plant in otherwise productive and decent soils, but when you find a place that's bad, your design really needs to focus on bringing those things back into healthy production, and that does require a lot of very careful design and implementation.
And it may take years.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's going to take years.
There's
There's a lot of I'm just struck at driving through Illinois, Indiana, farm country. It's a wasteland. That's death.
Yep.
Right there.
Yep.
And you can look and see the corn growing, but that's just a pale ghost of what it could be and what it was. It just boggles my mind that we think it's okay to create these systems where the organic matter doesn't even break down. That we have to then intervene in order to get it to break down.
And on top of that, we're not even addressing the inputs that went into growing that field of corn.
Right.
Right.
So we do have this responsibility to regenerate soils. And the good news, one of my favorite things about doing permaculture work and design work is helping people realize how much good work they can do with soil. So we're mimicking natural processes where nature lays organic matter down on the surface of the soil and allows the soil organisms that are there to take advantage of it, to thrive. And we're doing the same thing here. You see on the far left, there's a hugelkultur, which is a German word. Wood culture would be the translation, is the idea that you bury wood, wrist-sized or larger generally, in a pile of soil. And then you mulch over that and plant into it. The wood then is like a sponge. It stores water. Every unit of carbon holds 4 units of water. So it's basically soaking up and then slowly breaking down, slowly releasing the water, and also slowly breaking down over a period of time so that it's really rich soil. This is in Adrian, Michigan, where the Dominican sisters had a large property and they had brush piles and other dead trees that were overhanging parking lots or things, and they brought all that material in and they laid it down in these long rows and buried it with imported manures from the fairgrounds across the way, and then covered that with straw. And then they planted plants into it. If they wanted to, they could have inoculated it with soil organisms from various parts of their property to get the soil life going, and then enhance that with other kinds of soil life, and teas and compost, manure teas and things like that. But they had a pretty good basis, and so they're building these beds that were maybe 4 feet tall and 50 feet long, to give you some idea of the dimension. And building up the soil, building up the life, and creating microclimates so that they can grow berries and highlight that they're doing something different. This was on the corner edge of their campus, so they were demonstrating this to the community. In the middle picture, we have a permaculture design course. It looks like a hugelkultur. It's so tall, but it's actually just a sheet mulch method where they're laying down cardboard and paper and then covering this, in this case, with probably spoiled hay, which is not necessarily the best mulch material because it often has a lot of weed seeds in it. Mm-hmm. But this is what we had in this case. So the students are going at it and learning how to do this. And then on the right is a picture of one of my own garden beds in the spring. And this picture is particularly interesting to me because other than the 2 flowers that you see in the picture, everything is in that garden bed from sprouting voluntarily because it's part of the seed bank in the soil. So things that seeded and resprouted. So in the spring now, in certain beds, I don't sheet mulch and build up the soil as a matter of course. I let things sprout and identify what I want to keep, and then I mulch around those things as part of my soil building practice and water maintenance practice. One of our aims is to always keep the soil covered.
Yep. Number 1 soil sin is to leave it bare. Mm-hmm. And I love the picture in the middle. I'm a big sheet mulching proponent. I love a good bomb-proof sheet mulch that looks like about 2, maybe 3 feet high, which is fantastic. And it's just amazing what some mulching can do. I've seen just the most hard-pan soils become open and available over just 2 seasons of work with mulching. I'm a huge fan. It's just amazing what you can get through really, really passive and minimal interaction. There's no tillage, no digging. You're just encouraging all that soil biology to come out and express itself, bringing that back into life, and ultimately holding a lot of moisture in there as well. So it just cuts down on your watering in a huge way. Such a great practice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when I did this for myself in different gardens, I've noticed that the first year you sheet mulch, it's not perfect soil. But by the third year of repeated sheet mulching and tending the soil and putting organic matter in, it's pretty magical, and it just gets better and better every year.
Indeed.
This is a very intensive process. It's not something that we would use perhaps to remediate a 8-acre field. You'd have to use it on your home garden, but we're kind of gathering the resources to quickly repair these areas that we're going to use intensively, and then allowing nature to repair the extensive areas or through its own processes. Slow processes, but effective nonetheless.
Yeah, well, you bring up a good point, because we are importing materials into a site in order to make it productive. But once it's beginning to produce, it has excess that can then be exported to help regenerate the next area. Yeah.
And also, while these processes might not apply to farm scale, we do have other strategies like cover cropping that can help with that.
Right.
Absolutely. So where nature might take, 100 years to put up, a small layer of soil, humans, through gathering and importing and managing carefully, can do inches of soil at a time. So over time, once we've built our beds up and we're using our sheet mulching system, and we have a plant community that, we're comfortable with and we're evolving in our system, we also have to be putting a mind to and attention to how do we maintain fertility. And there are a number of things that we want to think about, but I'll just draw attention to 3 here. One is that animals, their function, again, is to increase fertility wherever they are. That's what they do. So they eat, hopefully a variety of things, and then their manure makes whatever they eat very available to the soil organisms, and enhances fertility that way. So these little mini lap rabbits here were great at eating all kinds of weeds and things that I couldn't eat, and turning that into really helpful manure that I put right on my garden beds, so that I had enhanced fertility of the plants that I could eat. And rabbit manure is one of those fantastic manures that you can put directly on garden beds. Llama manure, alpaca, you can also use directly on your garden beds. But other manures need to be composted or aged.
Our chickens.
Yeah, like chickens are the worst, right?
Yep. Number one and most hot.
Yeah. But besides animals, also making sure that you're growing mineral accumulator plants like this comfrey down here, which are also a great attractor for pollinators when they're flowering.
And they're also medicinal.
Do you want to talk about mineral accumulators, Milton?
Yeah, sometimes you'll hear it as dynamic accumulators. The science is a little fuzzy, but the idea is that they have deep roots that will pull up minerals that other plants with shallower roots can't reach, and then deposit them in the soil through their leaf matter, when they die. The short of it.
Yeah. So a lot of people take comfrey particularly and chop up the leaves. I cut mine about 3 times a year. Chop them up, put them in a bucket of water, let it sit overnight, and then use that to water plants that I'm growing for food or other reasons. And then mulch plants are another consideration for the system. And rather than importing hay or straw or wood chips or wood mulch, we can grow our own mulch right in place, so that the idea is that you're meeting all the needs of soil over the long term by growing everything in place for that system. I mean, should I say that this is a cup plant, which is... Okay.
I think you did.
Good.
Did you?
It's a cup
She
plant.
she just did. There it's
Great.
done.
So in this slide here, we're looking at then, of course, besides the things that the soil needs over the long run and providing for that in terms of animals or mineral accumulators or mulch plants, we also want to be thinking about how do we compost, because we use organic matter in our households for cooking and for other kinds of organic matter that comes into our households. Like I had a had and have a goal to compost all paper that comes into my house. And so how do I do that effectively? So there are lots of ways to compost, and the way to compost is to find the method that works for you and your household. So up here on the right, we have a picture of, a fairly traditional 3-bin system where compost is, added to one bin and then it's turned and then it's, let set for a while, or there are different ways for people to work with bin systems. The idea being that in a compost pile, you want to have the right balance of green materials and brown materials, fresh and carbon rich materials, and that you are providing the right levels of moisture and oxygen and doing that kind of work to maintain and turn out a rich finished compost product. For myself, that doesn't work for me very well because I don't tend compost piles very enthusiastically. So I prefer a method where I can either put compost directly under sheet mulch, or I will dig a trench along the edge of a garden bed I'm expanding and put my compost in that so that the soil organisms can work on that material directly, which is what the picture on the left sort of shows, that nature lays that material on the top and the soil organisms have access to it and transform it into soil.
And to jump in there, it really does matter what your individual tolerances are, what kind of time you have available as far as what you're going to prefer. It's not just what's appropriate in place, but it's what's appropriate to you. So for myself, I love composting. I'm a total compost nerd, and I spend a ridiculous amount of time on it. And so it also depends what you're composting. In my case, I had a system where we were composting human waste, so that would need to sit for a year, and then we could use that as a productive input for mulch beds and tree crops in our system where that was appropriate. But you can go that way. You can just do the chop and drop. There's sheet mulching is essentially composting in place, where you take your browns and greens and kind of layer them in like lasagna, and those things will break down over time. So everything composts to one extent or another.
That's right.
For me, it's however you choose to compost, really looking at the larger picture of things. Anytime you harvest something, you're essentially mining from the soil those nutrients. It benefits us to put them back in some way. And right now, our systems are set up so that we flush it down the toilet and throw it in the garbage. Looking for ways to kind of make closed loops is really beneficial.
So, to wrap this one up, we have been talking about soil. We've been talking about the importance of soil and how it's formed, what is going on in the soil, our responsibility to repair soils that are damaged, and just about every soil is damaged around the globe. So we have a lot of work to do ahead of us. Mm-hmm. We've talked a little bit about methods for regenerating and building soil, productive, healthy soils, and things that we can do and consider to keep them in balance and keep them productive.